Kia ora koutou katoa, ko John Reid taku ingoa. Welcome to this edition of Water New Zealand's podcast series, Tāwara o Te Wai. I'm John Reid from Water New Zealand, and with me is my co-host, Emily Afoa. Today, we're going to talk about the Commerce Commission's information disclosure requirements for the water industry. These were published by the Commission in February and are now in effect, with the first due dates for the various disclosures staggered over the next couple of years. Emily Botje is a principal engineer at the Commission. She has worked in the water industry for over 30 years and joined ComCom in 2024. Her focus is about improving outcomes for consumers through good engineering and asset management practices. Tim Hewitt is an economist and has worked for ComCom for over 10 years. He has worked across a number of different regulated infrastructure sectors such as airports, electricity, gas, fibre, and now water. Tim has worked across the full range of the Commission's regulatory tools, including enforcement. However, his primary focus has always been on how information disclosure and the analysis of that information can drive improvements in the infrastructure sectors. Kia ora, Emily, and Tim.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
Thanks, John. It's excellent to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us today. Tēnā koroa, Emily rao ko Tim. I'm going to start off with just a really scene-setting question to help our listeners connect with this kaupapa. What is the purpose of the information disclosure?
So information disclosure, it forms really the kind of the basis and foundation of economic regulation for infrastructure sectors. It's what we do in a lot of places and it's done in a lot of countries. But what it's all about is all about creating transparency. So transparency for consumers and other stakeholders to see what's going on within those organisations. And it's those organisations that are given the privilege of looking after those assets to provide the services for the community, in this case, water. So when the consumers and stakeholders can get that transparency and see what's going on, that helps them, I guess, hold those organisations, hold those water organisations and the councils to account, and encourages continuous improvement over time.
What's the value of that, and how will that help us sort of have a better water industry, if you like, in the future?
It can be in a couple of ways. I think when you're creating that transparency, there's going to be different people that are going to be looking at that information. Like I said, consumers and stakeholders, also the councils and water organisations themselves. So we found in other sectors that those regulated sectors do find the information really useful, and it kind of creates that awareness, improved awareness themselves and clarity of like their asset management planning, what they're doing, but easier to see the gaps, particularly when you've got standardized information across the sector. You can look at others and go, oh, hey, they're doing this. That actually looks really good. Why aren't we doing that? Or vice versa, things you can be really proud of. And likewise, when you've also got consumers and stakeholders seeing that, they can put pressure on the councils or the water organisations to say, hey, look, our neighbours are doing all this good stuff. Why aren't you?
We also looked at what we should be concentrating on too when we set up the ID way back when we started drafting our requirements, and looked at what information was already available in the sector. So the Water Service Authority, Tāwara, have been doing some great mahi in this space with their NEPM measures. So we didn't want to duplicate anything that was already there. So that's why our ID this time focuses on the financial and the asset management practices of the businesses.
Could you just elaborate what's NEPM for those who might not know?
That's the Network Environment Performance Measures.
Wonderful, thank you. And so you're saying that there's been some specific design around what you're doing as the Commerce Commission that's different to perhaps what others in the sector have been doing. You mentioned Taumata Arawai, and there's also been reporting through Water New Zealand.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. So we didn't want to duplicate anything. So Tāwara have picked up what Water New Zealand used to report on through their annual reports. So that's already still been continued on. So we certainly didn't want to then require regulated suppliers to report on the same or similar information again through ID. So some people might question why we don't have any disclosures about network performance or performance of the network operator, and that's because a lot of that information is already out there in the world for people to look at through the work that the Water Service Authority Te Aotearoa are doing.
How easy is it to find the information that's already out there in the world? I'm thinking through the changes that we've been experiencing, consumers have more of an interest in what's going on in our water infrastructure, but perhaps haven't historically been looking for that data. Is there a simple way or a well-defined way that people can access information, knowing that it is spread across, it sounds like, Taumata Arawai and the Commerce Commission?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's not easy to solve, but it does lead into what one of the other key roles of the Commerce Commission is within information disclosure. So when we ask for that information to be disclosed, it is disclosed by each council or water organisation in their own way on their website. But obviously that's a lot of organisations, and you combine that with information from through other systems, through other regulators, and through Local Government Act as well. It's confusing. So one of the key roles of the Commerce Commission is to bring some of that information together and produce, although granted it's another set of information, but it's a set of summary and analysis reports that can be quite at a fairly basic level of just kind of putting things into graphs, making it quite visual and accessible, or it can be quite in-depth studies where we can produce a report on something. So it's a key role of ours to not just make that information disclosure happen, but bring it together and bring it to life so that it really makes sense and becomes meaningful.
And you mentioned that some of the key things you'll be looking for are around asset management. Could you just elaborate on what those sort of typical areas might be? And obviously it's such an important area of the water industry to make some improvements going forwards.
So I'm a little biased here because asset management is obviously something I've been working in a field that I've been working for a long, long time. But really, asset management is the foundation of any good infrastructure business. So we wanted to concentrate on that. We've picked up best practice or good practice across the country. We've looked at what is being done internationally, and obviously through the guidance of things like ISO 55000, GFMAM, Apopo, IIM. And we recognise that there is a need to actually better share this information with interested persons and the consumer. So we've set up our requirements a little bit differently. So we've got a strategic asset management plan, and that's based on ISO 55000 requirements. So it's a real standard requirement sitting in the strategic asset management plan. But with the asset management plan, we've actually split this into two documents. So we have the asset management plan, which describes your assets, where they are, what they do, how critical they are, what the condition is, what you need in terms of investment to actually make them improve their condition, improve their performance, and also what kind of assets do you need in the future to meet the demands of growth, and also any changes to sort of drinking water standards or environmental regulations. So what's actually so that all sits in the asset management plan. And then we've taken out the financials and put those in an investment and delivery plan. This means that this plan can actually be changed on a regular basis as the organisation's financial situation changes. So councils have always done an annual plan, and quite often those annual plans change the investment requirements for water. So there's an opportunity now for regulated suppliers to pick up those big policy changes and actually change their plan on a more regular basis. We're also asking regulated suppliers to do an annual delivery report. So this is about providing more information to consumers on how they've actually delivered on what they promised in terms of their investment programs, and also how they're performing or how they're improving their asset management practices through their improvement plan. So there'll be more information available to those who are interested on how the organisations are actually improving, and that's what this is all about. We all know that our regulated suppliers are on a different level of maturity across the country, and that's absolutely okay. But what we want to see is that maturity improve over time.
Thanks, Emily. Really interested, Tim, in your sort of history and experience across a number of different regulated infrastructure sectors, and with the water industry just coming into this space. Are there important lessons that we can learn from those other sectors and apply to sort of help shortcut us into a sort of good practice?
I think, like Emily said, it is a thing that doesn't happen overnight. It is about looking at where the councils and water organisations are right now, creating that transparency, but then seeing the improvement over time. So it is a long game, but it really pays dividends in the end. And so we've seen that in other sectors, that it's taken a little while to get used to information disclosure, what's required, and then to get those improvements really happening. So there's improvement made initially, but then also a bit of patience to see as it plays out and get those improvements over time, because those really deep improvements through asset management planning, for example, they take time, but they really pay off in the long run. I think other sorts of lessons we've learned is just that it does require a bit of commitment. Information disclosure, it is a thing. It's not just a little tack on. It is important, and it's important to consumers, stakeholders, and the organisations themselves. So it needs to be resourced, needs to be taken seriously, and a commitment to actually making it happen. And because information disclosure is, and I'm biased, a bit like Emily's biased asset management, I'm biased to information disclosure. It's my favourite part of regulation, and I think it's really effective. And while it takes that commitment and effort, it's less commitment and effort than other options. So if we can really make this effective, then we can get those real improvements, and we do see some real improvements in other sectors. We've seen it be really successful, particularly where the organisations have taken on information disclosure as something that can benefit them and their consumers or their ratepayers, rather than just being another hassle in what's a complex time for councils at the moment that is full of a lot of hassles. So I understand that, but really taking it on in a positive way. We certainly see in electricity, for example, there's quite a few businesses now who, after 10 plus years, are coming out and saying that they had their grumbles at times, but they really see the benefits and advantages of it, and of information disclosure and economic regulation more broadly, and how it's really helped their business and help their consumers.
I hear your comments around it's a commitment that needs sort of resourcing and planning around delivery. Does that mean it will change the way that we're working to facilitate being able to do good information disclosure?
I think it's a good question. I think in some respects it's not so different. Councils in particular already have to do reporting. It's not completely foreign, so that doesn't change in that sense. I think some changes are the way of kind of setting it up in terms of how the local water done well policy's been set up to have the water services effectively ring-fenced from the rest of the council. So that's something that does need to be set up and approached differently. And I think then the other part is the asset management. And as Emily says, different councils are going to be at different places of maturity. So it depends a bit on where you're at. And it does depend on we're trying to be proportionate to different councils. So we know we've got some smaller councils versus larger councils, and that'll look different for them as well. But buying into that of the asset management improvements that need to be made.
There must be quite a few lessons from overseas, about information disclosure. How have we sort of taken that and applied it to make sure really it fits the New Zealand context that we need?
Sure. So I think that context piece is important. We do commonly look to regulatory developments in other countries, particularly the UK and Australia, but of course that is a different context, and it doesn't always work completely well, as we're seeing overseas. And if you're talking about organisations with Thames Water with, I think, population around 15 million or something, and we all have councils serving population around 15,000. So that looks very different. So it's important to be proportionate to the size. And same here at the Commerce Commission. We don't want to be a huge organisation that's a UK-style incised regulator for New Zealand, because ultimately consumers are going to have to pay for that regulation, both on what the Commerce Commission is doing and what the councils themselves are doing to respond. So it does need to fit into that context, but we do still look at what's being done, and information disclosure is something that has been done for a long time and quite successfully in other countries. So we've kind of picked up on the key parts of how that works, but then also, as Emily has said, had to do it in a way that fits in with the other regulators. So we've got a fairly complex environment we're coming into in New Zealand with the Aotearoa, the Water Services Authority in place, and the other reporting that happens under the Local Government Act as well. So finding our niche and then to make sure that overall is covered.
We've heard there's two framings within this information disclosure. You've spoken to the asset management piece and also the financial elements. How will Commerce Commission interpret these disclosures? Is it a pass-fail? Is there a grading score? What way is this information disclosure interpreted?
So there are a few ways we can do it, and there is a pass-fail element in terms of compliance. That this is they are, I hope, relatively black and white requirements that need to be met. But whether that's met or not is literally have you produced the thing you're supposed to publish on the date you're supposed to publish it. How good or not that information is and what it shows about the organisation, that's where the analysis comes into. And that's not a pass-fail, that's about us talking about where the councils, the water organisations are at, how they compare to each other, how that might change over time, areas that might be that they should consider really focusing in on. So it's a much richer analytical kind of an experience rather than a strict pass-fail score out of 10 or anything. And I think we've tried different approaches in other sectors over times, and we'll try different approaches with water over time, really depending on that context.
Does that mean that once information has been provided, there may be some dialogue back and forth between yourselves, particularly in this, I guess, teething phase where our new entities are standing up and coming to grips with what they're required to provide?
Yes, especially at the start, as you say, where things are, and that's partly about compliance, to be honest, as well, as just understanding the requirements, the detailed kind of technical elements of it, especially areas of the financial stuff. There's the way categories work and definitions and things. There will be lots of discussions about that. But then also once it's published, that there is that two-way dialogue over kind of what we're seeing. Emily, you've recently been talking to other people in other sectors from resulting based on information disclosure, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And again, they're all on their own journey as well in terms of improvement. And they need to make, the whole idea is to make this information actually improve their business practices. And so really what we're asking is for regulated suppliers to look more deeply than they may have in the past, and actually find those improvements and actually provide a better level of service for the communities that they service.
Emily, you were talking with enthusiasm about asset management earlier in the podcast. How does the ID sort of feed into to improving the asset management, and how are we going to interpret that?
Well, the approach we've taken for the electricity distribution unit businesses is more of a build a relationship type approach, where we've been these businesses have actually invited us into their organisations and presented to us what they're doing and how they're improving. But we also make contact with the suppliers as well, just to check in and see how they're doing. We found this approach a much better way, because asset management is all about the story, and to understand the story, it's best to talk about the story. So we've found this approach to provide that feedback and to get that understanding, the best way to actually approach it. So I'm hoping that we can do the same thing for the water industry. So any conversation is a good conversation. So I think we should start having those.
I've sparked another thought from hearing your talk about engaging directly and the experiences, I guess, through, I think you said, the electricity sector. given there's going to be a number of entities coming to grips with this, we spoke about some of them being of a smaller scale. Will there be avenues where the Commerce Commission can help facilitate some of this sharing of method or approach, or is that not appropriate? I'm just thinking, how can we ensure that the knowledge is being shared across multiple entities, given everyone's on the same path, but they may be coming at it individually?
That's a really, really good point. We work quite closely with Water New Zealand and Afoa industry groups, and we'd really like for these industry groups to pick up that challenge of sharing that information. We're really fortunate in the water sector. We are all good friends and we all talk to each other. So I think that line of communication's already there. We're sharing good stories, and I think the Commission would actually like to utilise that avenue as well to actually get those good stories out there so others can learn from what others are doing.
Perhaps some of the not so good stories too are what we wish we'd done as well.
Absolutely.
And I think it's worth pointing out that when we have set these requirements for information disclosure, we had to try and find a good balance between being really prescriptive in how they should be done and being less prescriptive. So it's not necessarily just in, I guess, your level of performance and say asset management, but how you do it and how you report it. And that's where we've got some feedback with people asking for more prescription because there's a methodology as to how you do something, and they're saying, how should we do this? But at the same time, we didn't want to prescribe everything because some of the councils already do these things, and we don't want to say do it a different way because then they have to redo their system. So it was finding a balance between those two things. We've done our best to find that balance, but it does mean they're left with some options when it comes to what methods they apply, and that's where the sector really can work together. And we've seen it work in other sectors. So, for example, in electricity, where we've got information on asset condition, that's based on what's been done by the Electricity Engineers Association. So they've got their asset condition and maintenance guidelines. So we take it for that. So it's already an industry standard. So where the industry can work together, that's probably better than us at the Commerce Commission telling the sector the way they should, for example, on asset condition, if we were doing asset condition, how they should grade assets, because there might be different things that we haven't thought of that are really important for the sector.
And it needs to be proportionate as well. So when you're comparing, water care with a smaller supplier, the way they do condition might be slightly different as well because of the resources that they have available to them.
Yeah, that's right. So it's another reason to leave some flexibility in the regime, but then that flexibility can create a little bit of uncertainty where the sector working together can be really useful. Places like Aotearoa and Water New Zealand. And we're happy to be involved in that.
I guess a lot of the point of regulation overall is around getting better outcomes for customers. So as we move into this first step in information disclosure, what's that going to look like for customers?
So for the consumers, I would say that they obviously have good drinking water quality, so they can turn their taps on and have confidence that the water that's coming out is safe to drink. And I know that is really what Aotearoa is all about, but we can support that too by making sure that they've got the right investments at the right time to make that happen. There's obviously the trust that the environment's going to be protected, and again that's with the regional councils and Aotearoa, but again we can make sure that that's actually being funded correctly and investments are happening at the right time. They can also have trust in their water supplier that they are not meeting not only today's needs, but they're also meeting the needs for future generations as well, because quite often infrastructure takes a long time to build. And so the regulated suppliers need to be thinking what's happening in 10 years, 15 years, 20, and sometimes even 30 or 40 years now to make sure those future generations have what they also need. So that to me is what success could potentially look like. And I'm sure Tim has some other thoughts on what success looks like as well.
I think that's spot on, Emily. It's really about that long-term improvement of the service, making it lowest cost for the best service that we can get through good asset management planning and those long-term investments. I think there's also elements of particular consumer outcomes, disconnections and restrictions, how the organisations, the councils interact with their consumers as well. And so we can see that come through in the asset management planning documents. We can see what council's approaches are, and so where there are weaknesses that can improve too, because there's only a few ways that consumers directly interact with these, although once they're paying a direct bill, that will change and increase. I also think because of the change that's happening in the sector, we might get a lot of increased interest from consumers, which is really good. So it's kind of a good time to have this information available where consumers are interested and engaged, and then the information is available that they can then see what's going on and hopefully answer the questions that they might have.
I think we've also got to remember too that our consumers don't have a choice. There's only one provider to provide them with these services. So with us involved and with the other regulators, our job is to make sure that supplier is actually doing the best they possibly can for that consumer.
Thank you, Emily and Tim, for joining Emily and myself today. It was great to talk to you about ID requirements for the New Zealand water industry. Thank you for listening to this latest episode. We're back soon with another episode.